Hey everyone, and thanks for joining today's webinar on import basics. Now, I'm sure you all know by now, my name is Milo and I'm part of the support team. And today I'm going to be talking to you about importing data into workbooks and using the built-in import wizard. We're most of the way through this year's support drop-in webinars, which are every other Wednesday at 4 p.m. You can see the next few that we've got planned there, and we do have a lot more to come. We also have 2-day training courses for both system admin and reporting, where you can go into more depth on the information that we've covered on our webinars. For information about these courses, you can contact your account manager or email training@workbooks.com. But let's get into the reason why we're here today. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about imports. And first, I will cover what you can do by importing data into your workbooks. From there, I'll go over the steps of using our import wizard and then show you how to create new records within workbooks with the import. As ever, these sessions will be recorded and we will have time for questions at the end. So, what can you do when importing data into workbooks? One of the key things that you can do is create new records, and I'll be showing you the steps on how to do this soon. This is extremely useful as you could have a list of people or sales leads and you want to bring their information into workbooks. Doing this via an import saves you time, especially if you have hundreds of people that need to be added. It also helps reduce potential human error as it takes the data direct from the file you're using. Of course, if there are any errors within the file, these would reflect in the import, but I'll look into that. I'll go over that a bit more later on. Now, when doing an import, you can also link data to existing records. So if you are importing a large amount of people, as you're doing that import, you can link these to organizations that you currently have within your database. You can also extend your import to more than one record type. An example of this could be that you're importing cases and you also want to create related activities for them. Importing allows you to also update fields on existing records. You may want to look into tidying some of your data, and what you could do for that is export the information from workbooks, clean it up in a CSV file, and then import it back into workbooks and overwrite the existing information. You can also choose if you just want to update records, whether you want to create new records, or if you want to both update records and create new ones if a record can't be found. Now, when you are putting your data together for your import, you do need to remember that it needs to be saved as a CSV file. Now, before you start your import, there are a few things to think about. First, consider where do you want to see the data from your file within workbooks? What record type are you importing to? And do you have a field for the data to go? One of the steps when using the inbuilt import wizard is to select which columns from your file map to which columns within workbooks. Then once you know where you're wanting to see that data, remember that on records, there can be mandatory fields. If you're going to be creating new records, do you have the information in your file that could be mapped to the mandatory fields? You also need to think about the format of your data. And by this, I mean, if you're going to import currency values, dates, or even email addresses, you need to make sure that these are in the correct format. If you're unsure about mandatory fields or what format data would need to be in, I would suggest visiting our knowledge base by either searching preparing your import data or typing in the link as shown on the screen. As I mentioned, Workbooks has an import wizard to help you get the data into your system. And in this session, I'm going to be going through the stages that are involved in that. And these stages include uploading your CSV file, reviewing the upload to make sure that it's been successful, mapping columns from your source data to fields within Workbooks, how to join together or concatenate values from different columns of your source data so that they go into one field, how to add fixed values if you don't have the information in your CSV file, how you can check to see if existing records are there and help avoid duplicating records, running your imports. Once your import has finished, how you can review the data, and then also how you can undo your import if you're unhappy with the results. But let me start to go through all of the steps for doing your import. So first, on the screen, and let me just zoom in a bit, you guys can see the file that I'm going to be using for my import. Now, for this, I'm going to be wanting to create new sales leads records. And when you do an import, you will probably have a lot more rows than I do. I've got it cut down so that you can see the steps. You can also see the columns that I have up here at the top. They have clear names and tell me what data they hold. Now, these headers don't have to match the field names that I want to populate within Workbooks. As you can see, I've got one of these columns called Works For, but on a sales lead, this would either be organization or employer. You can have columns that you're not planning on using for your import. They can still be in there. You just need to make sure that all of your columns have the correct headings. Now, let me go into Workbooks and start showing you how to do the import. There are two ways that you can do an import. First, if you go to the Start menu and then select which record type you're wanting to, so you can get to the landing page, you can see that there, up here in the top left, there is the option to import records. But the other way to actually show you guys is if you go to the Start and go to Bulk Changes, you've got the option that says Import. Now, when I load this up, on the left-hand side, you can see for the new import, it has a list of all the record types that I can import to. Now, these may differ in your own database depending on what records you have, but you will see the key main ones such as opportunities, organization, and people. So that's on the left-hand side. Here on the right, I can see a list of the previous imports that I've done so that if I do want to go back and review one of them, I can do. If I want to start a new import, I would first find the record type that I want. So I said, I'm wanting to do sales leads. So I'd select sales leads. And my import wizard has loaded up. Now, stage one is where I would add my CSV file. But I do want to point out a few things on this page first before I continue. First, we've got the tick box of use mappings from a previous import. And when you select this, you can see that the previous import is no longer grayed out and I can select a previous one. This can be particularly useful if you've done a similar import multiple times, that you can just refer back to it and help speed up the mapping process. The next section I've got here is import options, where the first one of auto approve. When you do an import, you will be asked if you want to approve or reject it. By selecting the auto approve, that allows it to just, as it says, auto approve, and it just speeds up that process. Now, I wouldn't advise doing this, selecting this if you're doing an import for the first time. So it allows you just to refer, so you can actually view the data and view the results. The next option that I've got here is enable audit. When a record is either updated or created via an import, it usually won't show within the audit of a record. If you do want to show it, you would obviously tick this, but as it does say on the screen, it may slow down the import because it does need to create those audit records. Something else to know is that when an audit record is created, it does take up space on your database. So if you are looking to find ways to decrease your storage usage, an idea would be to not have this ticked. Within my files details, the first one is where I would upload my CSV file. So let me just do that now quickly. And then with the two tick boxes, that's just indicating that I do have column headings within my file and that I do want to try and auto map those columns when to matching fields within workbooks. After the auto map, I've got the option where it says CSV file format. Now, there are multiple different file formats for CSVs, and you can select the one that you're wanting, but I would suggest that if you keep it as automatic, Workbooks will do some magic in the background and identify the format that works for you. Similar to that, you also have the character set, where again, there are numerous character sets to be chosen from, but if you have it as automatic, then Workbooks will determine that for you. Now, the final section on this page is the advanced section. Within here, this allows you to determine what fields are terminated by, what fields are enclosed by, and it goes into the nitty-gritty of your CSV file. Now, I will say that the majority of the time, these do not need to be changed. It's only if you need to show it in a particular way and you have made some changes. But as I said, most of the time, this does not need to be changed. So I have my CSV file uploaded. And what I'll do is go to the next up here in the top left. When I do that, it takes me to stage 2, where first of all, it allows me to name my import. By default, as you guys can see, it tells me what record I'm importing to, who it's done by, and the date and time. Now, you can change this name if you do want it to be more precise so that you can refer to it later on. You've also got the option of run after. You may have 2 or 3 imports set up to begin with, and this allows you to determine the order in which those imports run. The other option for import options, again, reflects what I had on stage 1, similar to the advanced CSV section here. So let's go on to stage 3. Stage 3 is where I would show my mapping fields. So on the left here, I can see the unmapped columns that I have in my CSV file. On the right on here are the unmapped fields within workbooks. And in the middle, that's where all the mapping has been established and that connection has been made. Now, on the right, I do want to point out a couple of things. First, we can see that the lead person's name has a star next to it. When it has a star, this indicates that it's a mandatory field, which means that it does need to be populated. You can see that I've got a couple of other columns here, or fields, such as campaign, that have a triangle next to them. These indicates that they refer to a different record. Now, in order to set up a new mapping, you can either click on the field on the left, or you can click on the field of the right. Both work the same way. So let me first add the person's name. And when that does, you can see that the field has been populated. And here in the file field, I have the option to select which column from my data I want to do. So I'll select full name. In the mapping type, there are a couple of different options, but I'll be going through those shortly. So once I've selected it, I would just go save and close. And you can see that it's now here in the middle. Next, I'm going to map my works for. And you can see this time around that it's populated my file field, but the field on the sales lead hasn't been populated. So I just need to select that. So go down to organization. And again, I can press save and close. Now, I mentioned earlier that you're able to concatenate two of your columns into one field. And as you can see, I've got address 1 and address 2. Now, I know both of these would be on the record our street address. So when I click there, I bring up my mapping. And for my mapping type, I'm going to change this so that it's concatenate fields from source file. And I have the option here to determine what separator I want between those values. Now, you do have space, comma, and new line, or you can set up a custom one if you want. But as we're going to be doing this for an address, I'm going to select new line. With that, I can then go add, and then I would select the column from my file that I want. And because I am adding multiple, I'd need to press add again, and this time select address 2. When I save and close this, if we have a look in the center now, you can see that in the middle here, it says address 1 / n address 2, which indicates that it's going to put those values in with a new line in between. Now, something else that you can do when setting up your mapping is you can put in a fixed value. And this could be particularly useful if you want the value to be the same, or you don't have the value within your source data. So I know in my data that for lead source, I have this column as blank. So I want to put a fixed value in. So if I click on that, for my mapping type, I can change this to fixed value. And then it allows me to put in the value that I want. Now, I'm going to be creating new sales leads here, and I know by looking at a new sales lead record that for the lead source, this is a pick list value with set values in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in trade show so that it matches the value that I've got in there. And once I've done that, I can save and close. And you can see that once I've changed that, lead source has now appeared as the unmapped file field because I'm no longer mapping to it. Now, with all of my mapping set up, I'm going to go to next. And here on stage 4, this is where we choose what type of import we're doing. So on here, you can see that I've got only create new records, but I do have the option of either only update existing records or update and create new ones. Now, I'm going to just create new ones. On our next webinar, we'll be going through these other two. So I'm going to create my new records, but I need to try and find a way that I don't create a duplicate record. Now, here we've got the option of saying, which field do I want to use as a unique identifier? In this scenario, I'm going to say that the email address is going to be the unique identifier that I want. So if I do have any other records that use that email address, then it won't create a new record. It's good to know that if you do have multiple selected, so if I say did email and organization, that to determine if the record already exists, it would see if both of those match. So it's done in an and way. I would usually advise to just stick to one identifying field rather than multiple, because if you do have a situation where both of them don't match, then you would end up with duplicates. So with this determined, I'm going to go to next. And this takes me to the summary page, just where I can go over this and check everything. And I do have the option of run. I'm not going to press run because I don't want you guys to sit here and wait for the import to finish. So what I'm going to do is just minimize this. And earlier, I did an import using the same data that I showed you guys. And you can see here that this is where it tells me my import status. And you can see that it's saying awaiting review and errors were encountered. So what I would need to do is just go through this, where it shows in my statistics how many rows were in my file and how many rows succeeded in being imported. And on the right, you can see how many were created and how many were updated. If I go to the tab at the top of affected records, this allows me to review the data of what was actually imported. And it shows me here that I've got 9 where it's saying that these leads were created. In my errors, it would tell me why the data wasn't created, and it shows here that it couldn't create a sales lead because there was an error with the email address, where, as you guys can see there, I've got a space in my email address, which shows that it's not valid. When I go to the tab of my rejected data, this lists all of the rows where it failed to create a new record. Now, when you do an import, and you do see that you do have the rejected data, if you've only got a few, one thing that you can certainly look into doing is you can export your data as a CSV, you can take it away, clean it up, and you can perform another import using that data. And as I showed you, you could also use the same mappings as a previous one when you're doing that. When I go to my warnings tab, this shows that while the record has still been created, some of the values that I put in there don't match the pick list value. And as you can see here, it's saying that with my countries, because I've got a space before United Kingdom, it said that it's an invalid value. Now, my other tabs, the field mapping settings just allows me to review my mappings. The error handling shows that I am creating sales leads and it can reject a row. And the upload file is where I can review the data that was uploaded. And again, as you can see there, I've got the space in the email address. Now, before I approve or reject my imports, I'm going to go to the sales leads landing page. And when I do this and go to my leads, you can see that we have numerous records that are shown in blue. Now, as it's my import, I'm the one that would see them in blue. And this indicates to me that they were created by an import and I still need to either approve or reject it. While I see them in blue, other people would still see the record but they won't be colored as they are. As other people can still see the record, they would be able to potentially go in there and make changes. And if they do make any changes, if I was to either reject my import, or what I'll show you shortly is how I'd undo an import a few days later, any changes that they've made would make it the most would update the record and would not be undone when I undo or reject my import, because it looks at the newest version of that record state. So going back to my import, what I would simply do here is I would just go approve. And when I do that, it's saying, are you sure you want to approve this import? I'll go yes. And if I go back to my sales leads page and refresh that, you can see that those sales leads are no longer highlighted. Now, I've just performed my import, where we can find it here on the My Imports landing page. And I'd said that you can actually undo an import. If you go into it, you do have the option of undo. And this allows you to undo the import within the first 30 days of when it happened. Now, as I said, if any changes have been made to those records, those changes won't, those records would still exist, but it is something just to be aware of. So that's it. So just to recap, before you start running an import, you do need to make sure that you do have a CSV file and that your data is in there, and also to check your data before starting to upload it. Within your data, it's always handy to have a unique identifier, preferably one that can also be seen within workbooks, so that you can identify if there are duplicate records, and so you don't create them by accident. And once your import has run, it's important to review the data, that you can export any errors in case you want to clean those up and re-import them later. And then once your import is finished, it's important to approve or reject what you have there. And you can also undo your import within the first 30 days. So let's see if we've got any questions. So I'm just checking, see if we've got any questions. I've got a good question here, which says, how long do imports take to run? Now, imports can take a various amount of time, and it depends on how many fields you're mapping, how large your file is. That if you do have a lot of data within your file that you're wanting to map, then it can take a bit. And also, if you are linking to other records, it can extend how long it runs for. And similar to that, if while an import is running, if you do want to stop the import, and if you want to undo an import, it can take about the same amount of time for that to run, because it would need to undo all of the changes that your import had done. I've got a follow-up question to that. I've got a follow-up question of, do I need to stay logged in while an import is running? No, you don't need to stay logged in. Something that I would advise someone to do is, if they do have a large file that they're wanting to import, that they could start it just before the end of the day and then leave it to run overnight, and depending on the size, it should be finished by the time you come back in the next day. I've got a follow-up. I've got another question from Tomislav. Importing for mail campaigns has a different approach, as we need to create person records first or not, and what would be the best approach? So, Tomislav, I presume that what you're saying is you're creating marketing campaigns and you're wanting to know if you need to create the person first and then be able to add them to the marketing campaign. One thing that I will actually show you on the next webinar is how you'll be able to create people and relate them to a marketing campaign and also give them a member status at the same time. And that can be done all as one import. It doesn't need to be done separately. Another question popped in of, can users still use workbooks while an import is running? Yes. Just because an import is running doesn't mean that you have to stop everything that you're doing. You can carry on working as per normal and the import will run in the background. And with imports, you can set up processes that do imports on a schedule. You would be able to set up a process that looks somewhere else for the files that you're wanting, and then brings them in and does an import. But that's something where you need to create a scheduled process for that, potentially with a SFTP server. And I'd said earlier that you can have several imports where you can decide which one you want, if you want to run an import after another one. Generally, most people would have one import that runs at a time, but there are times when you could have two imports running, though it does depend if you do have other background processes running at the same time. But it seems like those are all the questions for now. So one question's just popped in of, can support, so the support team, do imports for you? The support team is not would not be able to actually do the import for you, but we can certainly help you through the steps so that you can get that. If you do want someone from Workbooks to do the import for you, that's something that would need to be discussed with the account manager to look into getting potentially professional service time so that someone can run that for you. It seems like those are all the questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Our next webinar will be on the 15th of October, where we'll be building on what we've gone over today, and we'll be linking records through imports. But in the meantime, if you do need help, you can check our knowledge base, either by clicking the question mark icon within Workbooks or going to the knowledge base using the website provided. You can also reach out to support if you are one of the authorized support contacts, either by email, telephone, or the case portal. Alternatively, you can also reach out to your account manager. We do have recordings and videos on different topics on our site, and you can just use the link shown, or alternatively, you can also go to the resources section on our website and select webinar recordings, and you'll be able to see the past webinars that we've had, and you can also see other topics that have been covered. But I want to thank everyone for attending today. I look forward to seeing you next time.